Hey, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most important and maybe one of the most misunderstood hooks in React, useEffect. If you want to take your components from just showing stuff on the screen to actually interacting with the world, well, you're in exactly the right place. Let's dive in.
So just think about this for a second. A React component, its main job is pretty clear, right? It takes in some props and state and it renders some UI. It puts pixels on the screen. But what about when it needs to do more? Like, what happens when it needs to fetch data from a server? Or maybe start a countdown timer? How does it actually talk to anything outside of its own little React bubble?
And that's exactly where this idea of side effects comes into play. It sounds kind of technical, but it's really just the official name for any time your component needs to interact with the outside world. You can think of it as a bridge connecting your component to, well, everything else.
And this definition right here is so important. A side effect is any work your component does that isn't just figuring out what to render. So, reaching out to an API for data? That's a side effect. Setting up a subscription to a WebSocket? Side effect. Its job suddenly becomes much bigger than just the visual part.
And you know what? If you've written any React at all, you've seen these things a million times. We're always fetching data. We're setting up timers and intervals. We're subscribing to browser events. These aren't rare, obscure things. They're the bread and butter of building apps. And React has a specific tool built just for them.
And that tool, that's the useEffect hook. This is React's built-in, official way to handle all those side effects we've been talking about. I always like to think of it as giving your component a special mission, a task it needs to carry out that's separate from its normal duty of rendering.
Okay, so the structure of useEffect is actually pretty simple, but you gotta be precise. First, you import it from React. Then you call it right at the top level of your component, and you give it two things. The first is a function, and this is where you put your side effect code. The second thing, and this is absolutely critical, is an array. I want you to burn this into your brain. The function is the what you want to do. And that array, that's the when you want to do it.
And here's where the magic really happens. React doesn't run your effect immediately. It waits. It runs your code after it's finished rendering the component and painted the pixels to the screen. This is amazing for performance. It means a slow network request won't stop your user from seeing the page. The UI feels snappy and responsive, and your effect just does its thing in the background. All right, so now we get to what is probably the most important part of useEffect control. We can't just have our mission firing off all the time, whenever it wants. We need to be the ones in charge. We have to master the mission trigger. And that all comes back to that second argument we just talked about, the dependency array. This is the question that every single React developer asks. You set up a data fetch, you refresh your app, and suddenly you're watching your network tab go crazy. It's making API calls on every single re-render, maybe even creating an infinite loop. That is not what we want. We need to be able to tell React, hey, I only want you to run this one time when the component first shows up, or only run this again if this specific piece of data changes. And that dependency array is your entire control panel. If you give it an empty array like you see on the left, you're telling React, this effect has 0 dependencies. Run it once after the first render, and then leave it alone. This is perfect for setting things up. But if you put a variable in there, like count, you're giving React a new instruction. You're saying, hey, keep an eye on this count variable. If and only if its value changes between renders, then you have my permission to run this effect again. Okay, so our component can go on missions. It knows when to go on them. But some missions are messy. They leave stuff behind. And if we're not careful, that can cause huge problems. So we need a cleanup crew. And luckily, useEffect has one built right in. Let's use a classic example to see what I mean. Imagine in our useEffect, we start a timer using setInterval. All it does is log tick to the console every single second. Simple enough. The component mounts, the effect runs, the timer starts ticking. Everything looks great. But then, the user clicks a link and navigates to a different page. Our component unmounts. It's just gone. The UI it was responsible for has vanished from the screen. So the component that started that timer doesn't even exist anymore. What happens to the timer? Seriously, what happened to it? Did it get a signal to stop? Or is it just ticking away all by itself in the background, completely forgotten?
The answer is yes. It absolutely keeps on running. And this is a really big problem. It's called a memory leak. That invisible timer is still chugging along, eating up memory, taking up processing power. If you have enough of these phantom timers running, you can slow down and even crash your whole application. We have to clean up after ourselves.
So, how do we fix it? It's actually incredibly elegant. All you have to do is return a function from inside your effect. React is smart. It sees that you returned a function and it holds on to it. Then it runs that function for you at the perfect moment, either right before the component gets destroyed or right before the effect is about to run again. So for our timer, we just return a little function that calls clearInterval. Boom, memory leak solved.
All right, we have covered a ton of ground here. So let's just take a breath and boil it all down to a few golden rules. Think of this next slide as your official cheat sheet for using useEffect like a pro.
If you can just lock in these 3 things, you're going to be in fantastic shape. Number 1, effects run after the render is complete, which keeps your UI fast. Number 2, the dependency array is your command center. It controls when your effect runs. And number 3, and this is so important, if your effect starts something that needs stopping, like a timer or a subscription, you always have to return a cleanup function to prevent those nasty memory leaks.
Look, the uEffect hook, it's the key that really unlocks what your components can do. It's the bridge that takes you from just making static pages to building living, breathing, dynamic applications. You have that key now. So the only question left is the one you see right here. What are you going to build with it?